Hi, I'm Jessica Thompson, 18 years old, top 10 in my class, headed to Stanford on a scholarship. People said I had the perfect future, but that night I learned how fragile perfect really was. The living room smelled like vanilla frosting and plastic balloons. My graduation banner hung crooked across the wall. Congratulations, Jessica, barely holding on by 2 pieces of tape. Mom stood by the table, holding a half-cut slice of cake. She didn't even look at me when she said, "You've had your moment, Jessica. Let your sister have hers for once." The music stopped. Chelsea pretended to cry. Dad stared at the floor. That's how my celebration ended. Not with applause, but with silence. They called it understanding. I called it being erased. That night, they canceled my party. By morning, I canceled my silence. I wish I could say that night was the first time it happened. But it wasn't. It never was. Growing up, Chelsea was the miracle child, the one who cried pretty and laughed louder. When she threw tantrums, Mom called it expression. When I spoke up, it was attitude. Chelsea made honor roll once. Dad took her to Disneyland. I made it every semester. He barely looked up from his phone. She wanted to dance, so we danced. She wanted a guitar, so she got one. 2 lessons later, it gathered dust in her room. I worked double shifts to buy my first car, a used Honda with a dented door, and freedom that smelled like old gasoline. But I kept trying, kept showing up, kept waiting for the day they'd notice I existed. I thought college acceptance would change everything. Stanford, scholarship, a chance to make them proud. Instead, Mom called it good timing for the family. Chelsea was struggling with her grades again, so my news might hurt her feelings. That's how love worked in our house. One person's success was everyone else's inconvenience. The night they canceled my party, I realized I wasn't losing their approval. I was losing a game I never agreed to play. They called it maturity. They said I should understand. But what they really meant was, stay small, stay quiet, stay second. So I did what I was never supposed to do. I chose myself first. Because if being loved means disappearing, then maybe being alone means finally being real. When I left that night, the air was thick with garlic and guilt. Mom was stirring her pasta sauce, humming like nothing had happened. Dad was in the living room, pretending the news was more important than me. I walked straight to the door, bag over my shoulder, diploma in my hand. At the party, she'd said, "You've had your moment, Jessica. Let your sister have hers for once." Her voice echoed as I reached the driveway. I didn't cry. Not when Dad said, "You'll regret this." Not when Chelsea peeked from the stairs, pretending confusion. I just opened the door and stepped into the dark. 18, alone. But for the first time, mine. Aunt Karen met me at a coffee shop 2 hours later. She didn't ask questions. She just hugged me like I'd survived something invisible. "You did the right thing," she said softly. Her voice cracked, like she'd waited years to say it. That night, I slept in her guest room. A quiet space that didn't demand apology. No yelling through the walls. No footsteps pacing outside my door. Just stillness. In the morning, I woke to the sound of birds. The window was open. The air smelled like rain and coffee. For the first time in years, my body didn't tense at a closed door. That silence wasn't empty. It was peace wearing a new name. Aunt Karen handed me a mug and a plan. "You'll stay here until Stanford. We'll get the rest of your stuff tomorrow." And just like that, I had something my parents never gave me. A safe place to start over. Summer blurred into warmth and books and slow healing. I worked full-time at a bookstore downtown. The manager, Margaret, was kind and curious. "You remind me of my daughter," she said once. She had to leave home young, too. Sometimes I'd read psychology books on my lunch breaks. Words that finally explained why love could feel like punishment. Each page made the past make sense. Each shift made me stronger. By August, I'd saved enough to move into a tiny dorm. I bought myself a new bedsheet, a candle that smelled like vanilla and paper. That first night, I sat by the window, watching my reflection blur against the glass. I didn't look broken anymore. Just unfinished. And ready. I didn't just leave them. I left the version of me they built. Freedom doesn't always roar. Sometimes it exhales quietly and calls your name back home. 6 months later, peace had a rhythm. Early classes, late shifts at the bookstore, coffee that never cooled fast enough. I'd learned how to breathe without waiting for someone to take the air first. For the first time, quiet didn't mean danger. Then one morning, my phone lit up with an unknown number. I almost ignored it. Almost. "Jessica." Her voice cracked through the speaker. "Mom." For a second, I forgot how to swallow. "I saw your post," she said, too bright, too careful. The one about your research. You're doing so well, honey. My pulse thudded. That wasn't pride in her tone. It was opportunity. I was thinking, she continued. Maybe you could come home for spring break. We could throw a little celebration. Invite everyone. Make it up to you. Make it up to me. Those 5 words scraped something raw inside me. Mom, I said slowly, you canceled my graduation party because Chelsea was jealous. She sighed like I was reciting an old complaint. Let's not rehash the past. We all said things we didn't mean, but they had meant it. Every word. I can't come home, I said. I have work. Surely you can take a few days off. Your sister really misses you. There it was. The truth behind the invitation. It wasn't about me. It was about Chelsea's image. The family's image. They wanted to parade me as proof that we were fine. I'll think about it, I lied. When the call ended, I sat still, listening to the dial tone echo in my chest. The quiet that followed felt heavier than noise. Jessica, my roommate, peeked into the room. Family? She asked. Yeah, I said. They want to redo. You going? Not a chance. She grinned. Good. We already bought tickets. Mexico, spring break, no drama. That trip felt like sunlight. Sand under my feet, laughter without apology. For 1 week, I existed outside the shadow of their control. Each sunrise felt like a promise. That maybe family could be chosen, not inherited. That maybe peace wasn't loneliness, but belonging without fear. But peace doesn't last when guilt still has your address. The storm arrived in April. An article about my research went viral. Local news called me a promising young scholar from a small town. That same night, my sister called. Her voice was venom wrapped in tears. You think you're better than us now? Chelsea, what are you talking about? You left, and now everyone acts like you're some hero. Mom and Dad can't stop bragging about you. Then her words cut clean through the line. You ruined this family, Jessica. You abandoned us for attention. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel guilt. I felt clarity. I hadn't abandoned them. I'd escaped them. And that's what scared them most. Chelsea's voice still echoed hours after the call ended. You ruined this family. You abandoned us for attention. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not from guilt. From clarity so sharp it almost hummed. By morning, Aunt Karen was calling. Your mother and sister just showed up at my house, she said. Her voice trembled, the kind that comes before a storm. What? I whispered. They were screaming on my porch, Jessica, yelling about how I turned you against them. My stomach dropped. Did you let them in? Of course not. I told them to leave or I'd call the police. Then she paused. Chelsea said you stole her life. I laughed, but it came out hollow. She had every chance to build one. She just never did. That afternoon, social media exploded. Chelsea had posted a long, messy paragraph. My sister walked out on our family for fame. Now she pretends to be some perfect victim. She abandoned us because we loved her too much. The comments poured in. Sympathy from strangers, gossip from neighbors, and quiet disbelief from people who actually knew the truth. At first, I wanted to ignore it. Let her drown in her own lies. But silence was the language my family used to rewrite history. Not this time. I opened my laptop. My hands didn't shake. I wrote one post. Calm, factual, surgical. When I was 18, my graduation party was canceled because my sister felt overshadowed. My parents agreed. So I packed my bag and left. Everything I have now, I built from nothing but that moment. I didn't name names. Didn't curse. Just told the truth and hit post. Within an hour, it spread like wildfire. Former teachers, friends, even family friends commented, confirming everything. Screenshots, memories, receipts. By sunset, Chelsea's post was gone. Deleted. But the damage to their perfect narrative was permanent. That night, Mom called. Her voice was small. How could you humiliate your sister like that? I didn't humiliate her, I said. I just stopped lying for you. Jessica, we're family. No, I cut in. You're blood. Family shows up. Family protects. Family doesn't silence. She started to cry. But I'd run out of sympathy for people who only cried when caught. I hung up and sat by the window. Outside, the world felt bigger than it ever had. Not loud, just steady. Aunt Karen texted a few minutes later. Proud of you. Truth has a way of surviving noise. She was right. For the first time, the silence around my name wasn't shame. It was peace. They tried to bury me in guilt. Instead, I bloomed in public. A week passed before I noticed something strange. Silence didn't feel empty anymore. No more blocked numbers. No more anxious glances at my phone. Just stillness, warm and unafraid. Chelsea's post vanished. Mom stopped calling. Dad never reached out at all. And for once, their absence didn't ache. It felt earned. Aunt Karen visited that weekend. We sat on my dorm balcony with takeout and cheap wine. She raised her glass. To freedom, she said. To finally breathing your own air. I laughed. Feels weird, doesn't it? Freedom always does, she smiled. Until it doesn't. That night, I opened my laptop to finish a paper about resilience. Halfway through, I realized I wasn't writing about theory anymore. I was writing about me. About every night I spent doubting my worth. Every be quiet that turned into fuel. Every scar that became structure instead of shame. It wasn't an essay anymore. It was a map of survival. How I'd learned that peace isn't the absence of pain, but the choice to stop reopening old wounds. That healing isn't loud or dramatic. It's quiet, like forgiveness without reconciliation. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see the forgotten daughter anymore. I saw a woman who'd saved herself, when no one else bothered to try. Morning light spilled across my desk, turning every scar into gold. For the first time, the future didn't scare me. It felt like an open door I'd built myself. A story I could finally write my own ending to. No revenge. No bitterness. Just release. Because sometimes, the loudest revenge is living so peacefully that they can't believe you survived without them. Before saying goodbye, if this story touched your heart, please give it a like. And share it with someone who needs to hear this today. Don't forget to subscribe for more true family betrayal stories. That reminds us we are stronger than we think.
I was always the one who didn't need much. That's how they described me: low maintenance, easygoing, the good one. Camden had his spotlight team captain's straight white teeth and a grin that made our aunts melt. Tessa was the baby, dramatic and delicate, the kind of kid who got applauded just for showing up. And me, I was the middle, the buffer. The one who kept things from falling apart without anyone noticing I was holding the pieces. I remembered every birthday, even when they forgot mine. I learned how to braid Tessa's hair when Mom was too tired, and how to patch Camden's ripped jerseys when no one else could be bothered. I cleared dishes before being asked, offered rides without being thanked, and sat quietly in rooms where everyone else was too loud to hear anyone else. It didn't start out as resentment, just habit, then responsibility. Eventually obligation. I told myself this was love, that showing up even when no one asked me to was how I stayed part of the family. I was 18 when Dad first asked if I could help with Camden's insurance after his accident. 20 when Tessa's laptop broke and they suggested I just cover it until they could figure it out. By 25, I had a growing business and a withering sense of boundaries. I was paying for Tessa's textbooks, sending monthly transfers to my parents just in case, and covering the cost of every family dinner because you're the one with the money now. But I still got the same seat at the table next to the drafty window next to the dishes no one cleared but me. It wasn't that I wanted applause, I just wanted them to notice, just once. But they didn't. They noticed Camden's promotions. They noticed Tessa's breakups. They noticed Mom's migraines and Dad's half-finished deck. They never noticed that I was the one who stayed behind after the parties, collecting cups and scraping leftovers into the bin. I thought maybe one day they'd say it, thank you for always showing up. But instead, what I got was a voicemail that would change everything. The first time I paid Camden's rent, I felt proud. He'd just moved out after his third attempt at a roommate situation imploded. He called me late at night, said he was short just this once until the new job stabilized. I wired it within the hour, no hesitation. I even added a little extra, told him to get takeout so he wouldn't have to stress about groceries that week. He replied with a thumbs-up emoji. The next time came faster. He didn't bother explaining. Just sent the amount and a quick appreciate it. I told myself that was enough, that the silence after giving was part of the job of being the strong one. Then came Tessa's tuition gap. Something about her scholarship not covering lab fees. I got a panicked call from her 2 days before the deadline. I paid it. And the next one. And the next one after that. At some point, my card was saved on her student portal. My parents were slower to ask, but more consistent. The roof leaked, the water heater broke, the dishwasher stopped working. My dad would grumble through a call about how things just aren't built the way they used to be, then trail off until I filled in the silence with I can cover it. There were no thank yous, not even the small ones. Just more needs. And I kept meeting them thinking maybe gratitude lived in their comfort, that maybe showing up was enough even if no one said it out loud. But the moment I remember most wasn't a big ask. It was small, almost forgettable. My birthday 30 years old. No call, no card, no flowers. Just a single text from my mom at 3:17 p.m. "Can you Venmo me $80 grocery store was more than I thought." I sent it. Then I sat on my kitchen floor with the cake I bought myself and realized I hadn't heard anyone say the words happy birthday out loud that day. That night, I lit one candle and didn't make a wish. I just sat there letting the silence pile up like snow around me and wondered what it would take for them to notice if I stopped showing up altogether. Thanksgiving was supposed to be different. My house, my table, my rules. I spent weeks planning it, booked a caterer, hired someone to deep clean the guest bathroom, even bought matching wine glasses for the first time in my life. I wanted them to feel proud. Maybe if I gave them something beautiful, they'd finally see me differently. They arrived late, of course. Tessa walked in first AirPods and scrolling through her phone as if the whole event was background noise. Camden followed, calling from the hallway, "Do you have oat milk?" as if I were the hostess of a trendy cafe and not his sister. My parents came last. My dad handed me a lukewarm pie he picked up from the grocery store. My mom walked past me without a word and started rearranging my centerpiece. Dinner looked like something out of a magazine. The table glowed with warm lights, the food was plated perfectly, and the fire pit in the backyard flickered just enough to make it feel special. But nobody noticed. No one offered to help set the table, or clear it, or even ask how I pulled it off. When Camden stood up for the toast, he smiled and said, "It's good to be together again, no matter what this family shows up for each other." He raised his glass, and everyone nodded like he'd just solved world peace. Not one word about who paid for the catering. Not one word about the person who made sure it all happened. I waited for something, a glance, a whisper of acknowledgement. It never came. Later that night, I stood by the fire pit alone, the last logs burning low smoke curling around my sleeves. My dad walked past me with a sigh, looked at the setup, and muttered, "You millennials have it easy," before heading back inside. That was the moment I knew. I could give them everything, money, time, energy, and it would still never register. To them, it was just what I did, just who I was. A reliable current they never bothered to thank until the power went out. 2 months later, it did. It was a Tuesday, late. I had just gotten home from back-to-back meetings, the kind of day where my voice was hoarse and my legs ached from standing too long. I tossed my keys into the bowl by the door, slipped off my shoes, and noticed the blinking light on my phone. One voicemail. I didn't recognize the number at first, but the voice was unmistakable. My father. Clipped tight like he'd rehearsed the anger before dialing. "All you do is take. You've never given this family anything worth remembering. If you had any pride, you'd stop acting like we owe you something and just leave." I stood there frozen, the air still wrapped around me from outside. I replayed it once, then again. His words hid in waves, first confusion, then disbelief, then something deeper. Not rage, not sadness, just fatigue. I didn't call back. I didn't argue or explain. Instead, I walked to my laptop, opened the browser, and began the quiet process of undoing. The recurring payments to Tessa's college paused. The auto transfer for Camden's utilities canceled. The monthly deposit I made into my parents' emergency fund closed. No announcement, no dramatic farewell, just clean lines drawn in silence. Before I shut my phone for the night, I sent one message. To Tessa. Thought I never gave this family anything. No emojis, no punctuation. She didn't respond, at least not right away. And neither did anyone else. 3 days passed, then a week. Nothing. I went about my days like I always had: meetings, projects, early mornings, late emails. But something felt lighter, like I had been holding a rope for so long that I forgot how much it burned until I finally let go. It took almost a full month for the silence to crack. And when it did, it came as a shaky voice late one Friday night, asking why her tuition hadn't cleared. It started small. A missed call from Tessa at 11:42 p.m. I didn't answer. Then 2 texts back to back. Hey, I just logged into my school portal. My tuition didn't go through. Is something wrong with the account? Can you check, please? I turned my phone face down and went back to watching the snow fall through the cafe window. I'd been in Denver for 3 days. I hadn't told anyone I was going. I'd booked the flight in silence, packed a bag in 20 minutes, and left before sunrise. No return date, just space. The next day, Camden left me a voicemail. His voice was clipped, frustrated. Serena, the car's been towed. I thought we had a deal. I just need a couple hundred to get it back. Call me. We never had a deal. We had a pattern. By the end of the week, I had missed 9 calls from my mother. One voicemail stood out. The bank's saying the mortgage payment didn't clear. Did something change with the setup? Yes, everything changed. I sat in that same corner seat at the cafe every morning sipping coffee. I didn't rush journaling in a notebook that still smelled like the bookstore I bought it from. The world didn't fall apart. In fact, it got quieter in a way I hadn't known I needed. I slept better, ate slower, walked without glancing at my phone every 3 steps. The silence back home cracked louder each day. My father's tone shifted from annoyed to alarmed. Tessa texted again this time without pretense. Please, I'll lose my scholarship if I get dropped this semester. I still didn't answer. What they never realized was that I hadn't left out of anger. I left because I was done giving pieces of myself to people who only felt my worth when they were in crisis. They weren't calling because they missed me. They were calling because their safety net was gone. And by the time they understood that I was already watching the sunrise over the mountains, breathing in a version of peace I hadn't known was possible. Noelle was the only one who never asked for anything. She didn't take sides, didn't gossip, just sent me a message that read, "You need to see this. Sorry." Then a link. I hesitated before clicking, but curiosity won. It led to a Reddit post anonymous under a throwaway account, but unmistakably Tessa. The writing was her voice, even in its most performative form. The title was dramatic. My family fell apart, and now I might lose everything. The story painted her as the victim of a sudden breakdown. Her sister, once generous and kind, had apparently become erratic, resentful, and withdrawn. She claimed I had ghosted the family, pulled out funding without warning, and abandoned them during a critical time. Strangers were commenting, offering sympathy. Some were even donating. There was a linked GoFundMe with $6,000 already raised. I didn't get angry, just tired. I opened a folder on my desktop one I had quietly kept over the years. Labeled receipts, wire confirmations, tuition screenshots, textbook reimbursements. $94,000 total across 6 years. I compiled them into a private image album. No names, no dramatic captions, just dates, amounts, and transactions. Then I logged into Reddit and posted one comment beneath her story. Before you donate, maybe ask where the other $94,000 went. That was it. No flames, no accusations. Within hours, the thread exploded. A few users started asking questions. Someone found a past post that contradicted her claims. The donations slowed. By the next day, the post was flagged for suspicious fundraising activity and removed. Noelle messaged me again that night. You didn't deserve that. Just so you know, some of us have always seen the full picture. I stared at her words longer than I expected to. Not because I needed validation, but because I hadn't realized how much I'd been waiting for anyone to say that out loud. It didn't undo the damage, but it did something quieter. It reminded me that not every silence was empty. Some were simply waiting to be filled with the right kind of truth. And now that truth was finally catching up to them. I had almost forgotten about the lake house. It came up in a passing thought while I was closing old accounts, just a line item in my budget-labeled property taxes. I pulled up the paperwork. My name was still on the deed. Sole owner. No shared stake. I'd paid for it outright 4 summers ago, back when Dad said he wanted something for the whole family. He promised it would be our shared legacy. But the only legacy it ever became was theirs. I flew home on a Sunday morning. I didn't tell anyone I was coming. I rented a car, drove straight from the airport to the house I grew up in. The yard was overgrown. Camden's old truck sat in the driveway, dust-coated as if it hadn't moved in weeks. I still had a key. My mom had forgotten to collect it the last time I visited. The lock clicked like muscle memory, and I stepped inside to the sound of voices coming from the living room. I paused just out of sight and listened. "She's being dramatic," Camden was saying. "She'll come crawling back once she gets over herself." "I just don't get why she's doing this," Tessa added, her voice low. "It's not like she needs the money." Then my father's voice unmistakable. "Serena's always been the weak one, hiding behind her work, acting like she's special just because she has a bank account. No one pushed back. No one defended me. They were so sure I wasn't there, so sure I wouldn't hear them. I didn't cry. I didn't walk in to confront them. I just stood still, letting their words settle into something solid. Confirmation, not surprise. Then I turned toward the hallway past the kitchen and stopped in front of the gallery wall that used to be covered in family photos. Most of them were new beach vacations, graduations, birthdays. There was a framed picture from Thanksgiving 2 years ago, the one I hosted. I'd paid for the photographer, the food, the decor. And there they were smiling in matching sweaters, raising glasses around my table. I wasn't in the photo. I stood there for a long time, not because I was hurt, but because it was finally so clear. I reached up, flipped the frame face down, and walked out without a sound. Then I drove straight to the lake house. The morning of the auction, I parked across the street and sat in the car for a while, watching the clouds shift above the old roof line. The notice of foreclosure sign was already staked into the lawn. The front door was propped open, and I could see Daniel inside, clipboard in hand, speaking with the rep from the auction company. I stepped out quietly. I didn't need to be there, not technically, but I wanted to be. Not for vengeance, for witness. People started arriving, curious neighbors, a few serious bidders, a couple looking for a retirement property, and then my family pulled up. They piled out of Dad's Chevy like they had somewhere else to be. Camden saw me first. His jaw clenched. Tessa had her sunglasses on, but her eyes were red. My mom looked like she hadn't slept. Dad headed straight toward me, posture stiff. "You really doing this?" he said, voice sharp. "I am," I said calmly. "You're going to humiliate your own family over what some misunderstanding you think this makes you strong?" "I'm not punishing you," I said. "I'm just finally choosing me." Tessa's voice cracked. "Serena, please. I dropped 2 classes already. I don't even know if I can enroll next semester." I turned to her. "I paid for 3 years, Tessa. Every bill, every textbook. You never said thank you. Not once." Camden stepped forward. "You could have said something. Given us a warning." I looked him straight in the eye. "I did. You just never listened. The auctioneer called for attention. We'll begin in 5 minutes." My dad shook his head. "You think this house means something without us?" "No," I said. "That's why I'm letting it go." I walked past them and into the house one last time, signed the paperwork, handed Daniel the keys. I didn't linger. When I stepped back outside, the family that once expected me to hold them together stood motionless on the porch like they couldn't figure out how to exist without the version of me they'd always depended on. But I kept walking. By that afternoon, the house belonged to someone else. I moved to Chicago 2 weeks after the sale. No dramatic announcement. No fresh start proclamation. Just a quiet lease on a modest loft near the river, big enough for me and small enough to feel mine. There were no auto payments tied to anyone else's name. No forgotten birthdays to compensate for. No texts asking, "Can you cover this just one more time?" The quiet didn't echo. It softened. Most mornings I made tea and watched the streetcar pass below. I read books slowly, walked without headphones. Sometimes I forgot my phone for hours and didn't panic. The weight that used to press against my chest like a fist finally loosened. There was nothing to brace for. The calls stopped after the auction. A few guilt-laced voicemails came in that first week, but I didn't listen to them. I blocked every number one by one, and eventually the silence held. Then, one morning, an email. "Subject, I get it now." From Tessa. It was short. No excuses. Just, "I understand now. I'm sorry for what I said and what I let them say. You didn't deserve any of it." I read it twice. Then again. I didn't reply. Not out of anger, not even out of pride. Just, Clarity. I didn't need her to understand anymore. I wasn't waiting for them to say sorry so I could begin healing. I had already started. Some apologies don't open doors, they close them gently. I clicked archive and watched the screen go still. That afternoon, I walked to the lake, stood near the water, and let the wind thread through my sleeves. The air smelled clean. Not new, but earned. And for the first time in years, I didn't wonder what they were doing or whether they were still talking about me. I just stood there breathing, finally belonging to myself again. And when I got home, I knew exactly what I wanted to do next. I took what was left of the college fund, the account that had once been set aside for Tessa's final year, and redirected it. The nonprofit was small, tucked into a corner of the city focused on scholarships for first-generation women in tech, the kind of girls who reminded me of myself before the weight of expectation blurred the lines between support and sacrifice. I didn't put my name on anything, no plaque, no announcement, just a quiet transfer with a note that said, for the ones who won't have to explain why they matter. Back at my loft, I cleared a space on the bookshelf. I framed an old photo Noelle had once sent me us at age 9, aprons, crooked faces, smeared with flour mid-laugh over a batch of burnt cookies. Next to it, I wrote one line on a torn piece of cardstock: some family is chosen, some peace is earned. I slid it into the frame and stepped back, not to admire it, but to feel the stillness of it. It didn't take much space, but it finally felt like mine, and I never sent another dollar their way again. When the lawyer said everything goes to your sister, I didn't flinch. I had flinched 1,000 times before. This time, I just folded my hands in my lap and watched her smile. Sloane, my older sister by 3 years, sat 2 seats down in a black sheath dress that cost more than my mortgage. Her blonde hair was styled into soft waves, her nails a muted rose, her expression composed, but just smug enough for me to see the celebration underneath. We were seated in a dark-paneled conference room on the 28th floor of Denton and Ward, the family's longtime estate firm. It smelled like leather and old decisions. Mr. Halpern, the attorney, cleared his throat delicately as he continued reading my father's will. The properties in Bainbridge, Westport, and Aspen, as well as all holdings of Quinstrat Holdings, including asset subsidiaries and the executive trust, are hereby transferred in full to Sloane Quinn Rivers. He glanced up, perhaps to see if I'd speak. I didn't. Sloane did. That's generous, she said softly, more to herself than to anyone else. I studied her face, not out of jealousy. I'd stopped expecting fairness from our father years ago. Richard Quinn believed in legacy, and to him, Sloane was the polished stone he'd carved to carry it. Married to a real estate developer, mother of 2, Ivy League graduate board chair of the Quinn Foundation, the kind of daughter who fit into newspaper announcements. I, on the other hand, had always been the splinter in his system. A marine biologist, divorced, living alone in a 2-bedroom cottage near the shore. I'd left his world of boardrooms and strategy dinners, and that to him was betrayal. Mr. Halpern cleared his throat again. To Ms. Emery Quinn, he said my name small between the echoes of glass and silence, a box of personal effects from her late mother, including photo albums, handwritten journals, and select jewelry pieces. Sloane exhaled a soft puff of breath that barely contained amusement. She turned her head slightly, just enough to speak without looking directly at me. I always thought Mom's pearls would suit you. Something simple for someone grounded. I didn't answer. I just reached for my bag, stood and smoothed the skirt of my navy dress. "Are we finished here, Mr. Halpern?" I asked. He nodded quickly. "Yes, Ms. Quinn." As I walked toward the door, I heard Sloane again, her voice syrupy sweet. "Emery, if you ever need anything Quinstrat's expanding, we might have a spot for you. Something field-based." That made me stop just for a second. I turned to her and offered a small smile. "Thank you, Sloane. But I think I'm where I need to be." Outside, the air tasted like late autumn, salt and pine and the last edge of gold in the leaves. My mother used to say this was her favorite time of year, when the old things fall and the ground makes room for something else. I didn't drive straight home. I took the long way past the shoreline, past the old lighthouse. And when I finally walked through the door of my cottage, I went straight to the bottom drawer of my desk. The envelope was still there, the one my mother gave me 2 years ago, her hands trembling. "Don't open this until your father is gone," she had whispered. Now he was. And I was ready. The envelope was thick, sealed with a strip of aging tape and slightly yellowed at the edges. My name was written across it in my mother's handwriting firm, elegant, deliberate. Emery. Just that. No date, no explanation. She'd handed it to me one rainy afternoon 2 years ago, sitting on the porch of this same house. Her hands had trembled more than usual. The cancer was already working quietly then, like so many things in our family did. "Don't open this until your father is gone." She'd said, her fingers pressing the envelope into mine like it was something sacred. Promise me. I had. And today was the first day that promise no longer held. I opened the envelope, slowly peeling the tape back as if rushing it might break something inside. At the top was a letter written in blue ink on ivory paper. My mother's voice came back to me with every line steady, warm, a little sad. "My dearest Emery, if you're reading this, your father is gone, and I'm no longer there to say the things I should have said louder sooner. Your father built Quinstrat with stone and steel, but he never saw the ocean. Not really. He never saw you." My throat tightened. I sat down on the edge of the couch, the letter trembling slightly in my hands. "While he chased markets, I followed your work quietly at first. I watched you care for coastlines, speak at conferences, build something that mattered. And while he mocked your career choices over dinner, I began investing. Under the letter were folders, thick ones, documents, stock certificates, investment summaries, holdings in over a dozen sustainable tech companies, some now valued in the hundreds of millions, all legally transferred to my name over the course of nearly 2 decades, through silent moves, through shell accounts he never questioned. This is yours, every share, every dollar. He can't touch it. Neither can Sloan." I blinked, scanning lines of legal language all signed notarized. My name, again and again, beneath initials I didn't recognize her lawyers, her planners, her allies. She'd built a fortress under his nose. Do with it what I couldn't. Be louder than I was allowed to be. Build something better and let no one make you feel small again. I closed the folder and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. The walls of my home seemed to shift, expand, even. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. A new message from Sloan. "Let's have dinner. We should talk about what's next for the family and for you." I stared at the screen for a moment, then slowly typed back, "Come by tomorrow morning. I have something to show you." I didn't sleep much that night. I stayed up reading, calculating, remembering. Not just what my father had taken from me, but what my mother had been quietly giving all along. And I wondered, what would Sloan do when she saw it? Sloan arrived at exactly 10:00 a.m., sharp as always. I watched from the front window as she stepped out of a silver Mercedes heels, clicking against the stone walkway, her black coat cinched perfectly at the waist. She paused briefly at the garden gate, eyes scanning the modest cottage like it offended her. She knocked once. I opened the door before she could knock again. "Emery," she said with that curated warmth in her voice. "You look rested." I nodded. "Come in." She walked past me, her perfume trailing behind a familiar blend of expensive restraint. Inside, she glanced at the furniture, the bookshelves, the unpolished wood floors. I saw her eyes flick toward the old photographs on the mantel. She said nothing, but her mouth tightened ever so slightly. I led her to the dining room where the documents were spread out neatly across the table. I'd spent the morning organizing them by date, by holding by region. Sloane's heels stopped short at the threshold. "What's all this?" she asked, cautious now. "Something Mom wanted you to see." She approached the table slowly. Her manicured hand hovered over the first folder, then touched it lightly. I watched her scan the title, then the numbers. Her eyes narrowed. "These are investments," she said, flipping a page. Then another, renewable tech, ocean conservation. "What is this, Emery, my inheritance?" She looked up sharply. "Excuse me, I didn't repeat it." I just stepped back and let her keep reading. Within minutes, her posture shifted. She stopped flipping and started reading. Her eyes darted from figure to figure, page to page. Her fingers trembled slightly enough for me to see. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. "This can't be real," she said. "Mom didn't. She wasn't." She was just a housewife I finished for her. She didn't answer. She knew what she was doing, I said softly. For 20 years. Sloane's face flushed. She picked up one of the folders and stared at the notarized signature. This is in your name, she said. All of it. She turned slowly, her jaw tight. Dad never mentioned anything like this. He wouldn't have allowed it. I nodded. That's why she never told him. Silence. A long, heavy stretch of it. When she finally spoke again, her voice had lost its polish. So what, now, she asked. You want to trade seats? Be the one holding the family name now? I shook my head. I don't want your seat, Sloane. I want my own table. She stared at me, eyes wide, not angry, not afraid, just disoriented. Like she'd walked into a room where the walls had quietly moved overnight. By noon the next day, the tremors had already begun. A headline blinked across my phone screen as I sipped coffee on the porch. Sustainable Shadow Empire tied to late Richard Quinn's Widow Shakes investment world. I hadn't spoken to the press. I hadn't posted a thing. But money always knows where to look, and when it moves, people follow. By afternoon, Quinstrat Holdings had dropped nearly 17%, not from scandal, from doubt. Doubt about leadership, doubt about vision, doubt about Sloane. The calls started early the following morning. Sarah Reyes, my mother's attorney, called first. Calm, precise. Your mother anticipated this, she said. We're ready. I didn't ask how she knew which this I meant. The leak, the drop, the public reversal. There were too many options. She assumed, Sarah continued, that once your father was gone and the board learned the scope of Margot's investments, they'd panic. She left us prepared to respond legally and financially. She always planned in silence, I said. Yes, Sarah replied. But she played the long game. By midweek, Sloane had gone quiet. I hadn't heard from her since the morning she left my house, clutching a folder like a shield she didn't know how to use. Instead, I got a message from my cousin Jake, someone I hadn't seen since Thanksgiving 5 years ago. Hey, Emery. Congrats, I guess. If you ever need help managing that portfolio, let's talk. And then another. It's unfair, you know. Dad built Quinstrat for the family, not for Mom to undercut it from the grave. That one came from Uncle Bennett, always loyal to Richard. Always skeptical of environmental idealism. I didn't respond to either. Instead, I opened a new tab on my laptop and pulled up a grant application from Pacific Blue Labs, a nonprofit my mother had backed anonymously for years. They were developing a biodegradable mesh to collect microplastics without harming plankton ecosystems. I read through their latest field reports, their funding gaps, their projections. And I thought, this is what legacy should look like. Quiet, tangible, unapologetically useful. That afternoon, the board of Quinstrat convened for an emergency meeting. I wasn't there, of course, but I heard later from Sarah from Whispers Online that several key investors had demanded a vote of confidence. Not in the company. In Sloane. The same board my father once chaired was now questioning the daughter he'd groomed to replace him. Not because of me, not because of revenge, but because they'd finally seen something better and realized it had been there all along in the shadow of the empire they thought was eternal. The first real crack didn't come from the market. It came from her daughter. I heard about it from a former Quinstrat assistant who had quietly slipped me a message, someone whose name I only vaguely remembered from Christmas cards. They say she left the board meeting early, the message read. Mira asked her why people online were calling her a fraud. Mira was 9. Bright, sensitive, the kind of child who listens when you think she's not. Sloane didn't respond to my calls. Not that I tried often. Once, maybe twice. No answer, no voicemail. But a few days later, a package arrived at my door, unmarked, wrapped in simple brown paper. Inside was a manila folder stamped confidential, and a note. If you really want to clean up the ocean, you should probably see what Quinstrat's been dumping for years. No signature, just a trail. It led to internal reports, years of environmental negligence buried in quarterly language, offshore lobbying, paper-thin compliance, and Sloane's name on half the memos, not as author, as recipient. She had known, not all of it maybe, but enough. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with the documents fanned out beside my laptop, the light low, the silence steady. Outside, the wind rattled the glass, and I imagined my mother in this same chair poring over legal codes, figuring out how to protect something no one thought worth defending. My phone buzzed. Sloan. A text short I messed this up. Everything. Then a minute later, can we talk? I stared at the screen. Not out of anger. Just caution. What version of my sister would walk through my door this time? The executive? The daughter? The girl who once took my lunchbox and threw it in the lake behind our summer home, or someone else, someone in between? The next morning, she was there again. Same car, no heels this time. Hair tied back face bare. She looked smaller, like someone trying not to be noticed. I spoke to the board, she said, standing on my porch. They want options. They want an exit. I didn't say anything. They're thinking of dismantling parts of Quinstrat, she added. But some are suggesting a merger with Mom's companies. That made me look up. Her voice cracked a little. They think your holdings might be the only way to save what's left. I studied her carefully, not out of spite, but because for the first time I didn't know what she would do next. Sloan came back 2 days later. This time, she didn't wait to be invited inside. She stepped over the threshold like someone carrying fire. They're calling an emergency session, she said. Tomorrow. I set down my mug. For what investor flight? Sustainability backlash. They're reviewing the CEO position. Her mouth pressed flat. Mine. I nodded slowly. They should be. Her eyes narrowed. You think this is justice? No, I said. It's overdue. She dropped a stack of printed emails on the table. I didn't need to read them. The logos on the headers were enough: Blackbridge Capital, Norwind, Caris Equity. All major investors. All pulling out. They're afraid, she said. They should be, I replied. You sent them impact reports. On Quinstrat. On Dad. I didn't write those reports. I just made sure the right people read them. Sloane's jaw clenched. You're dismantling everything he built. No, I said. He dismantled it when he ignored the future. She sat down hard. For the first time, she didn't look like someone in control. She looked like someone trying to find the floor beneath her. I was 12 when Dad told me I'd run the company, she said, staring at her hands. He said I had to be sharper than the boys. Colder, too. I waited. I thought if I kept doing what he said, I'd stay safe. You weren't safe, I said. You were obedient. She didn't deny it. The room held a kind of stillness I hadn't felt in years. Then she looked up. We could combine them. Your company's Mom's holdings. My infrastructure. We could turn Quinstrat into something else. I shook my head. That's not what Mom wanted. She wanted change. She wanted clarity, I said. And you're only seeing clearly now that your seat is on fire. Sloan flinched, and for a moment, just a moment, I saw the child she had been. Not the one with the lead in the school play, or the one Dad paraded through board meetings. The one who used to sleep in my bed during thunderstorms because I was the only one who didn't tell her to stop crying. Don't do this to me, she whispered. I'm not doing it to you, I said. You just finally can't stop it. The following morning, the headline hit: Quinstrat Board removes Sloan Quinn Rivers as CEO amid investor exodus. I read it in silence, then closed the article. Outside, the wind picked up early winter in the air now, not yet bitter but sharp. I didn't text her. I didn't gloat. I just opened my inbox, clicked on the draft I'd been refining for weeks, and hit send. To Pacific Blue Consortium Board Subject Project Margot. Full launch proposal, let's begin. 3 weeks after the board removed Sloan, Sarah Reyes showed up at my office with a slim, white envelope. She left one more letter, Sarah said, placing it gently on my desk. Your mother asked me to hold it until a certain condition was met. I looked at her. What condition? Sarah gave a faint smile. She believed Sloan might change. I waited until the office emptied before I opened it. The handwriting was the same, calm, looping familiar. My darling Emery. If you're reading this, then something has shifted. Maybe not in Sloan's actions, but in her eyes. If she has faltered, stumbled, or softened even briefly, I want you to consider this." I paused, the edge of the paper warm beneath my fingers. "Your sister was raised in your father's world. She was built to obey, to impress, to win. But she wasn't shown how to feel safe in her own skin. I know she hurt you. I know she made it easier for him to ignore you. But that wasn't strength. That was fear with better posture." The words landed quietly. No drama, no plea. Just a mother saying what she had seen finally without blinking. "I've created a separate fund. It's small compared to the rest, but its purpose is clear education outreach and environmental literacy. If and only if you believe she is ready, I want you to let her lead it. Not because she deserves forgiveness, but because sometimes the most radical thing we can do is offer someone a chance to be better." There was no signature at the bottom, only a final line. "She is your sister Emery. She may not always have been, but she might yet become." I folded the letter slowly and slipped it back into the envelope. Outside, the ocean was stirring gray-blue under the pale sun. I thought about all the ways people try to rewrite the story of who they are, and how often they wait for someone else to start the sentence for them. That evening, I sent a message. "Dinner Thursday night. Just us. Bring nothing. No promise, no offer. Just the door opened barely, but opened nonetheless." On what would have been my mother's 70th birthday, we planted a tree in the garden she once tended. It was Sloane's idea. She showed up with a small magnolia roots wrapped in burlap and a pair of gloves I hadn't expected her to own. We didn't say much, just Doug settled the roots and pressed the earth back in place. The air smelled like damp soil and salt, like something honest. Afterward, we sat on the back steps watching the breeze pull through the leaves. Sloane sipped tea. Her hands were dirty and she didn't seem to mind. She used to talk about ecosystems, she said quietly. Tried to explain balance to me once. I didn't get it. I just wanted to go back inside. I smiled but didn't respond. The silence wasn't uncomfortable now. It felt earned. In the months that followed, Sloane threw herself into the education fund. She met with teachers, scientists, community leaders. She listened, asked questions. Sometimes too many. There were stumbles, missteps. One event went over budget. Another had to be canceled due to poor planning. But she kept showing up. One afternoon, I visited a classroom where she was teaching kids about marine debris. Her sleeves were rolled up. Her shoes were off. She laughed at a question she didn't know how to answer. It was strange seeing her like that, and oddly familiar. Back in my office, I hung a new photograph on the wall, right beside the one of Mom in her garden. This one showed Sloane kneeling beside a group of third graders, pointing to a map of the Pacific, her eyes bright. Not the CEO, not the heir. Just a woman trying again. My phone buzzed, a message from her. The kids want to build their own cleanup model. You in? I stared at it for a moment, then typed back, count me in. Because in the end, it wasn't about who got what. It was about who knew how to plant something that could grow. You don't have to explain. Just leave a single dot if you've ever been there.